Look, my main thing that I've learnt through my journey with my son is that we have legislation and it's there to protect individuals with disability, and we need to use it. And not everybody who works within the disability support sector fully understands and appreciates what that means. I have to constantly check myself that I'm always putting, when dealing with Hayden, that I'm not imposing my view or my feelings of things, that I am supporting him in such a way that he's able to express his wishes and his desires. And unfortunately within the sector, people struggle with that sometimes because they feel that they've got to protect them and keep them safe. But my view is that locking somebody up for the rest of their life is not keeping them safe. I have a son named Hayden who's 31. Mm-hmm. He was diagnosed at 2, thereabouts, with severe autism. Yes. And a mild intellectual disability. Right. Mm-hmm. He lived with us at home until he was 21. Mm-hmm. He has 6 brothers and sisters, but they're all very wonderful with him, and he loves them very much. Yeah. And at the age of 21, things were getting quite challenging for us, being able to manage Hayden's challenges that he can bring, and we didn't. I would have to say we didn't have the depth of understanding back then that we now do. Right. About what are the major contributors to these behaviours other than autism. We applied for help from the department. Everybody has to go to the Department of Human Services if they require support. Right. And he was placed in a community residential unit, which is basically a group home with other, in this case, males. Yeah. I'd have to say it was probably the most traumatic experience I've ever had. Oh. He was very traumatised. He wasn't transitioned into that move. He was basically just moved from home straight into the house, so there was no sort of going and having a look and that sort of thing. Right. Yeah. Because he had a history of going walkabout from a very young age, they put him into a locked residential unit, so he wasn't able to independently move in and out of the unit.
But isn't that contrary to the Act?
They certainly didn't go through the process of assessment, developing a behavioural support plan, which is now the legal document that guides the use of restrictive practice. Yeah. And so they moved him into this locked house. He was very traumatised initially, but the main thing is the Department of Human Services moved him in there. Now that I know what I know, I would not have done it the way it happened.
What do you mean by that?
If I had my time again, I would have started planning for my son's move a lot earlier. Right. I would have put him on the public housing list. And I would have developed a plan around him.
So what happened then?
I guess initially that move was done for my needs. Yeah. So that I didn't have that pressure. But it wasn't done for his needs. Right. His needs weren't really considered at all. It was a family contacted them, said they were in crisis, struggling to cope. Right. The Department of Human Services got involved and moved him out of the home into the only bed that was available at the time with a locked door. He was very traumatised. He demolished his room, so he smashed every wall, ripped off all the doors of the wardrobes, pulled the curtains down. And most of this he did with either his feet or his head. His self-injurious behaviour is usually in the nature of him headbutting something when he becomes very agitated. It was very traumatic, and I really don't like to sort of reflect on it because it's very difficult for a parent to place their child in and admit that they're not coping.
Yes.
And there are a lot of families with autistic children who are in this category who are caught between the reality of what they're living every day and the fact that no human being could weather that without there being some major consequences. One of the major issues that we had once he was placed into care and into a locked house is he would get out. Even though it was locked, he would find a way to get out constantly. There were 75 missing person reports from a locked house.
So how would he do that?
He would, he could tell if there was a casual carer on, and he would, make friends with them and then ask them for a screwdriver, and they would think, oh, this guy's really quite high functioning and he's, really into some sort of a hobby using a screwdriver, so would allow him to have it. He would hide it and then use it the next morning, unlock his window and get out. He would wait until they weren't watching and grab the keys. Or if the door was unlocked, sometimes he'd just push past them. If they were standing at the door, he would just escape.
And pursue his liberty.
Yeah. Or sometimes he would climb the 8-foot fence in the backyard and squeeze through gaps about this big.
He didn't want to be there, did he?
Absolutely not. So after a while I realised that there was a message in that. And the main thing was that each time he did escape, even though it was challenging for us, we didn't know where he was, but each time there was a little bit of information or data that was positive. So either he turned up at a hospital at the end of the day, or he wasn't hit by a car. Each time he survived, and he walked every major freeway, main road to get where he wants to go. He walked from Greensborough to Rosebud.
How far is that?
It's 105 kilometres.
What did you decide to do then?
I approached them and said I wanted him moved from the locked house to an unlocked house. They did give it a shot for one time, and mostly it was successful, but there was just one incident that didn't go quite as we'd hoped, so they shut the door again and refused to open it. So I continued to campaign. In the end they said, look, we can't do it, we're worried about our duty of care, and if something happens to him when he's in the community, our support workers are going to be traumatised for the rest of their life. So it's best that he stay locked up for the rest of his life. Throughout all of this, I'm gathering a whole lot of information. I'm also studying at university, doing a psychology degree. And as part of my elective stream, I did disability studies. So I now knew the legislation and the standards and so forth. And I knew that they didn't have a legal mandate to lock him up. And what happened was I attended a conference where the Office of the Senior Practitioner presented and talked about their role and about what were the justifications for the use of restrictive practice. And that for me was very emotional because my son's been mechanically restrained, so locked in a house, and he's been chemically restrained, so he's been given drugs to subdue his behaviour. And I just left that presentation and I came straight back here to Melbourne because that was in Geelong. I rang the senior practitioner's office, and then my husband and I were in his office. That was a Friday. We were in his office on the Monday. I was excited because I realised finally I had somebody in authority that would back me up in what I knew was true. So my husband and I went there on the Monday morning and had a meeting with them, basically told them what our experience had been and our son's experience. At this stage, he was very traumatised, but the senior practitioner was very validating. It became evident to him straight away that there were a whole range of legislative breaches. So with his support, then we approached the regional manager for the services that were supporting our son, and he was very validating and supportive. And then Hayden was moved about 3 or 4 weeks later to a home very nearby, just sort of across the road, to a unit that is unlocked.
How's that going?
Initially, as we anticipated, it went a bit pear-shaped because he had his freedom again. He went a lot because change, even if it's a positive change in and of itself is a challenge for people with autism.
Sure.
It was still anxiety provoking for him, so he would leave. So the frequency of him leaving has still been fairly high.
Yep.
But nowadays, instead of him just walking to the other side of the city, which is often what he did do, he will walk here, or he'll walk to his dad's workplace, or his uncle's house, you know, those sorts of things.
So he's thinking for himself.
He certainly is. Thankfully, the legislation there and clearly says that we cannot use a restrictive approach with somebody for fear of risk. I can't lock him up because I'm fearful of that risk. As high as it is, I still have to give him the dignity of risk. And that's all I've asked for my son, who very clearly was able to communicate by breaking out of his homes so many times. He was telling us something, that he was very unhappy and he had rights, and it meant a lot to him to access the community. It meant a tremendous amount to him. He loves to walk, he loves to watch people, he loves to interact with people. So if we're comfortable that mostly they're safe and that we've done all that we can to supplement that, as parents try to do, you know, before they release their kids at 18 onto the roads, you know, they hope that they've given them everything that they need to be safe. But it's not 100% risk-free. And that's basically, you know, what I tried with Hayden. So that legislation is really clear. Any restrictive practice has to be backed up by a behavioural support plan that articulates that whoever's made this decision has tried every other least restrictive option. And that was never offered to Hayden. It was either in or out. And so I knew what the legislation was. The Senior Practitioner's Office backed that up. And that's how we've ended up in the situation we're in now. And now the funding structure has changed, and each individual who receives services can have an individual support plan, and then the money to achieve that, and it's all around their goals and their dreams in life and what they want to achieve. And we've just put that application in, and Hayden's been granted a sum of money that will now allow him to live in his own home, and it will pay for support people to come in and make sure he's okay in the morning, and then later in the day. We're fairly confident he'll manage overnight, and so he's really excited.
That's fantastic.